Hello and welcome to Birth as We Know It. I am your podcast host, Kiona Nessenbaum. I have experienced birth as a doula, a student midwife, and as a mother of 3 amazing children with my husband and high school sweetheart by my side. After attending over 130 births, including my own, I've realized that each birth experience is truly unique. So make sure you subscribe and join me every week as we are guided through many different birth experiences through the lens of the storyteller. Please be aware that some of the stories can be triggering to hear, so feel free to pause, take a breath, and come back and listen whenever you're ready. With that said, let's prep ourselves to dive deep and get detailed about what really happens in the birth space. As a reminder, this podcast is intended for educational purposes only and has no intention of giving or replacing any medical advice. All advice that is given on the podcast is from the personal experiences of the storytellers. All medical or health-related questions should be directed to your licensed provider. Before we dive into the episode for today, I want to invite you to become part of the Baki community on Patreon. For just $3 a month, you will be contributing directly to the production of the Birth as We Know It podcast, which makes it possible to share birth stories like the one you're about to hear today. All right, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Birth as We Know It podcast. Today, I am really excited to have on an old classmate from MCU. Her name is Rebecca Greene, and she is the owner of Greene Midwifery in Iowa, and she serves Northeast Iowa as well as Southern Minnesota. So welcome, Rebecca.
Hi, thanks.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and start off by you just telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So, like you said, I'm a midwife. I have been practicing for about a year now, and I only do home births in Iowa and mainly serve the plain community, meaning Amish or Mennonite, but I do have some non-Amish clients too, who the Amish refer to as English, regardless of race or ethnicity. It just means that you speak English and not Pennsylvania Dutch, pretty much. So that's what I do. My passion is for mommies that are healthy and able to have a safe birth at home.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Tell us a little bit about who is in your family.
I have a husband named Trevor, and we've been married going on 6 years. And we have a little boy who is 16 months old, and his name is Sean.
Cute.
And yeah, his birth is why we're here.
Yeah, I'm super excited to dive into that and hear all the details. So let's go ahead and start off with your planning. It sounds like pre-recording you had mentioned that you had planned to try to have Sean. So let's talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah, so when you are becoming a midwife, you have a certain amount of numbers and skills you have to check off and amount of births you have to get done in your apprenticeship. Well, I was at the very, very end of my apprenticeship and had planned on finishing up my births originally in my last due date would have been October of 2021. So me and my husband discussed it and we decided we'd try to start around May of 21. And then we were successful fairly quickly for living in separate states because my internship was in Wisconsin at the time and he still lived in our home in Iowa. So planning was a little tricky. So we were successful and found out I was pregnant in July. And perk of working as a midwife, I never peed on a stick with this pregnancy. Before I was wondering it was too soon to do the at-home test. So the midwives at the birth center I was working at said, well, it's not too soon to draw your blood. So that's how I tested to see if I was pregnant. But we ended up getting pregnant, and then the next births, my primary births that were supposed to be wrapping up my skills, things just happened and they didn't end up working out, meaning that I didn't end up being the primary midwife at their delivery for various reasons. So I had to start all over again because I had
Mm.
to at least do all of the care for 2 trimesters. Um, so that means my primary births ended up being postponed all the way until I got one in January and one in February. By that time, I was fairly pregnant because my due date happened to be the end of April. That made me stress out a little bit because
Yeah.
after you finish your births, you have to take this big exam called the NARM. And I explain it like a boards exam of some kind. And that's how you get your license. So I was very, very pregnant, hoping these last few births would work out perfectly, that I could catch them, and we could go on to do my exam all before I gave birth because I had a literal ticking time bomb in my uterus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the plan, and it didn't work out. So we made do with the best we could.
Yeah. And then, so how long did you have to wait to sit for the NARM after you finished your births and numbers?
There's a lot of paperwork that comes with it, and after I submit my paperwork, someone has to review it and approve that I did all my skills and everything. So that, assuming you do everything perfect and they verify every one of your signatures, um, then you get approved to schedule the NARM. I finished my last birth. She was due on the 26th of February. She ended up giving birth on March 1st. So I finished March 1st, got all my stuff in, and then everything got approved the middle of April.
And when were you due? The end of April?
I was due April 23rd.
Mm.
So it was
Okay.
real close.
Yeah.
So when the testing center called me, because that's how it goes, they call you and say, all right, we need to schedule you for your exam. They called me at 39 weeks on the date.
Mm.
So I said, can I do the soonest available slot, which happened to be in 2 days?
Mm.
Um, and they said, yep, that's fine. So I was 39 weeks and 2 days. I was sleeping in my bed, not super restful sleeping because I have this huge test coming up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wake up at 4:30 in the morning and have a stomach ache,
Mm.
some cramping. And my brain said, yeah, that that was a contraction, but I'm very stressed. And I'm a midwife, and I know stress can cause like extra Braxton Hicks or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and denial is my best friend. So I had to be up. Well, I had to leave the house at 6:30, so I had to be up in a little bit anyways. Perk about being an Iowan, you're gonna drive a ways to get anywhere. So
Mm-hmm.
the testing site was an hour away from my home. So I needed to leave by 6:30. I am just letting my husband sleep, and these Braxton Hicks seem to have a pattern of about
Mm.
every 12 minutes, really consistently. And I was like, that's frustrating. So I started getting ready about 6 o'clock. Um, my pattern had been going on for over an hour now, but it was still 10 to 15 minutes apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not a big deal. I'm a first time mom. First time moms can go a day in labor. I've got time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I call my best friend who is a midwife and I say, Shailene, I am in early labor, I think. Should I go take this test? She had taken the test a couple months prior,
Mm.
um, and she knew what I was getting into, and she knew that it's a pain to reschedule this test. It's a big test. It's an expensive test. No one wants
Mhm.
to reschedule this test. Not to mention the fact that if I rescheduled it, I would be a postpartum mom. I would have all of that to deal with. And nobody wants to be away from their brand new baby for 6 hours, you know?
Mhm.
So I talked to her and she's like, "You're a first time mom." She said the same things I did. These could be just stress induced, just relax, go ahead and do the test. All right. Well, that was at 6 o'clock, and I called my midwife, and she said the same thing. We're all like, we got this. Well, I am sitting on the toilet putting on my compression socks, right? Because I am swollen like a walrus. So I'm putting on my stockings and I'm singing to my little baby a song about how it's a beautiful day, but it's not his birthday, so he's gonna need to stay in and let mama do what she needs to do. No sooner do I finish my song than he breaks my water. So then I said, "Oh, shoot." And that was at 6:23, and I have 7 minutes to decide if I'm leaving to go to this test. And of course, my midwife brain is on. And I'm like, "Oh, the water's clear. Everything's okay." I'm evaluating myself as I'm
Mhm.
in labor and not using my mom brain, but using my midwife brain. And I call my actual midwife, and she's like, "You've still got time. You know,
Mm.
I'm glad that your contractions started before your water broke, but you've still got time." We decided I was going to go for it. However, I did tell my husband, "Hey, we're definitely in labor, but I'm going to go do this test." And he was very nervous about that plan. My husband is an engineer. He likes things to work as expected.
Mhm.
And birth doesn't do that.
Right.
So he said, "Okay, well, I'd done a million practice tests. I had a good idea of how long it would take me to finish this test." And he said, "I'm driving you." And I was like, "That doesn't seem necessary. I can drive myself." But he decided that he was driving me, which in hindsight, a very good idea.
Very, very good idea.
So I ended up waddling into the testing center. I talked to the person who was at the front desk, and I said, "I understand the rules that you're allowed to get into your locker for snacks, drinks, or medicine. However, I am in labor and leaking fluid. Can I get into my locker to change my Depends as needed?
Mhm.
Also, can I put this towel on my chair?" And they were like, "Yes." And everybody, around me was a little bit more nervous than me. Also, there was only one other woman taking an exam at this
Mm.
testing center. It was a woman taking her architecture license boards,
Mm.
whatever those are. The rest were men taking doctorate, like to be a physician exams.
Mm.
So everyone was trying to be really supportive, although very scared. And they're like, "Good thing there's a hospital just down the street." And I'm like, "Yeah, we're going to go home after
Yeah.
this." No, and no one understood that I was a home birth midwife and that's what I was doing, but they were all
Right.
very supportive. The good news was my midwife happened to live 7 minutes from the testing site.
Oh, good.
So although I drove an hour to get there, she did say, "If you're really in it at any point, you can stop the test, or immediately after the test, and you can come and have the baby at my house if it
Mm.
seems like you need to do that. I said, that's great. But I didn't think I would need to do that. So my labor was fine. I'm pretty good at being in denial and just ignored my contractions for the most part. Did my first half of the test. The second half, well, then you get a break. You get, I think it's an hour. They allow you to have a break. I was not going to sit around for an hour. I wanted to get this done. I was feeling the pressure. So I ate a granola bar and then had some pretty intense contractions in a public restroom.
Mm.
Was sweating, and my brain said, you just have to get this done. You have to pull yourself off of this toilet and go finish your test and then go home. So I got up, got out, and finished the test. I managed to do the test in 4 hours and 20 minutes. You're allotted 3 hours per half of your exam with an hour in between. So I powered through it as fast as I could. By the end of it, I was pouring sweat. And my brain was like, I realize that I am in very active labor right now. And I took off my sweater, but they are pretty strict. It's a testing exam. They don't want you cheating. So the woman came over to me to tell me I could not have my sweater sitting on my desk, but I needed to put it on the back of my chair. Um, and I had 2 questions left, so I just clicked whatever. I don't think I read them. I just put an answer down and then said, "Done, I'm done, I'm done." And I stood up and then pressed like next, and it asks you to do like a survey about how the test went. And I said, "No, I don't want to. I don't want to do this." And the lady's like, "Go. I'll exit out and, you go." And so I'm waddling out. I told my husband to be there at 12. It's 12:22, and I waddle out of the testing exam, look in the parking lot, and my car is nowhere to be found.
Oh no.
I call my husband and I'm like, "Where are you?" And he goes, "I've been sitting in the parking lot for like 20 minutes, but then I realized I should probably get gas. So then I went to the gas station." And
Oh.
he's like, "I'm like 5 minutes away." So he ended up finishing getting gas, coming, picking me up. And I was like, "Drive home." Called my midwife on in the car, and the exam tells you how you do. Like, you get an email of a preliminary pass or preliminary fail. Not a final score, but it gives you an idea. And I got the email and it said I passed. However,
Yay.
I did not care.
Oh
That
yeah.
point, I was like, "Okay, great." So all I said was, "Oh, I passed." And then I'm calling my midwife and also avoiding sitting on my butt. Um,
Mhm.
I am in a position where I'm basically stand leaning in the passenger seat of the car. Like, feet are on the ground, pushing my butt in the air so that I am not having any pressure on my butt because I felt a lot of pressure.
Mm. Mhm.
And I called the midwife and I said, "We're going home. I don't think it's time for you to come yet. I think the car is just making these contractions really bad." And I love my midwife dearly. Her name is Dawn. She's an amazing woman. And she did not listen to me. And she was like, "Okay, I won't come," while packing her bags and getting in her car and driving to my house. So we arrive at home, and I immediately go to the bathroom and sit on the toilet and call my midwife again and say, "Dawn, I'm on the toilet. I know I should not be, and I cannot get off. So where are you?" And she said, "I'm 20 minutes away." I said, "Okay." So I finally get off the toilet, get into my bathtub, but I'm laying like a pencil. My legs are straight, and I, with all my might, am holding this baby in. And my
Mm.
husband is trying so hard to calm me and soothe me and tell me everything is going well. And all I said is, it's going too fast. It's going too fast. I can't have this baby without a midwife. And my husband, being very sweet, said, there is one midwife here, meaning me, because I just passed my exam. And
Oh, sweet.
instead of thinking that was the sweetest thing I've ever heard, I screamed at him, she's busy.
Good answer. Good answer.
So then eventually my midwife came running in. I had three. There was two midwives and an assistant midwife, but Dawn was the primary and the closest. The other two would not have made it. So after an hour and a half, or nope, 2 hours after I finished my exam exactly, my little boy came out. His head was out, and I still was not actively pushing. I had the fetal ejection reflex, and he was trying to be born. And I was not being the best mother at that time. I was still avoiding having a baby at all costs. And Dawn saw his head, and I said, no, it's going too fast. And she said, his head is out. You need to give me your baby now. Like, you
Mm.
need to let go and birth your baby. And I was like, fine. And then I let go and pushed him out. And it was such a whirlwind. I had no idea. I was in a state of shock. And he was just right on my chest. He did amazing. But I still hadn't clicked into like mom yet, like
Mm-hmm.
no mama brain. So I see that I'm bleeding a little bit, and I look at the bleeding in the tub. I'm not like loving on my baby. And I say,
Mm.
Dawn, are you looking at this? And she goes, yeah, it's a little heavy. Let's get you out. And I'm just evaluating everything from a midwife perspective because I didn't get that time to switch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I get out, go to my bed, and there's just a lot of things happening. Finally, my midwives show up, the other two. One shows up after the baby's born, but before the placenta. The other one shows up once the placenta is born. My placenta came out maybe after 45 minutes or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I bled a lot, a
Mm.
lot. Um, so much that if I were the primary midwife, and my mama was not also a midwife and understood the assignment very clearly, I would have transferred because it was, you're not getting out of bed for 2 weeks, period, while taking blood builder and only taking care of yourself. You know,
Wow.
um,
Yeah.
it was a lot. I also could not empty my bladder, which is a very important thing afterwards.
Right.
And the funny thing was, I was like, why don't you guys just cath me? Like, meaning give me a catheter. And
Mm-hmm.
they don't typically do that. And I said, well, do you have the supplies? And they said, yeah. And I was like, well, Kristen, who's the student, I said, well, let's check off a skill. I'll
Mm.
show you how. So I'm laying on the floor of my bedroom with a mirror, teaching the student midwife how to insert a catheter, do the little iodine. Do you see your urethra winking? And it was so funny. And we had good laughs about it.
Just like you're showing her
Yes.
your own urethra. You're like, yep, that's it right there. Go
See
ahead.
it? And then you just guide it in. It's okay. And
Yeah.
yeah. But I was so swollen that we couldn't get it in.
Mm.
So it took a lot. And I had a rough postpartum recovery. But once my bleeding was controlled, my bladder was empty because we did eventually get the catheter in. We kind of took a breath, but it was hours after.
Mm.
And my baby was born at 2:30ish, right? And my family wasn't expecting anything but me to call about my exam. And they anticipated my exam would be done in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't call anybody until after 7 p.m. And they were
Mm.
like, "Why haven't you called us? What's going on?" And I told them that I passed my exam and I also gave birth.
Yeah.
And they were
Oh gosh.
blown away. So, 2 life milestones achieved within 2.5 hours of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Goodness, Rebecca. Oh my goodness. First thing that's a lot.
it's a lot.
That is a lot. And it's just so crazy because I'm thinking, being a person that has labored before, I have also been in denial before. But then when that moment clicks of, oh, this is actually real, things usually get a little panicky for people. But you're like, I got to finish the other half of this exam. Like, I got to do this. And so it is interesting to me because you were sitting there in this exam in labor. And then when you got home, you were in this state of midwife brain. One, because you are, you were officially, preliminarily passed this exam as a midwife yourself, but also you just took this test with all this midwife info. So that's like at the forefront of your mind. And then having that moment of evaluating yourself before and after you took your exam, probably also during, like, okay, how close do I think these contractions are now?
Mhm.
Okay, I got about this much time left to finish this exam based off the information that I know, so it's like you midwifing yourself through this entire thing while also probably turning to your husband and being like, it's okay, I got this. Like, let me just finish it. And then you're like done. And probably in this state of almost panic of like, where the hell are you? You are not outside. I need you. Like, it is go time, And he's like, I'm
Exactly.
just getting gas. I'm just getting gas. And then to also have to drive back home a full hour. He was probably stepping on the pedal a little bit heavier.
Yeah.
So,
My husband is
oh
a rule
man.
follower and he
Mm,
does not speed. And I was looking over and we were flying home. And I was like,
mm-hmm.
oh, this must be serious.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. He understood the assignment
He
there.
did. He did.
Oh, that is so, so, so awesome. I think it's amazing. That's such an amazing perspective of birth because you are, midwifing yourself. And so I do have a couple of questions. Because you were midwifing yourself so much, it sounds like when your son was born, you didn't have that immediate like connection. Did that impact you throughout your postpartum time?
It did. I'm glad that you caught that because a lot of people are blown away by the story and then don't
Mm-hmm.
notice those things.
Mm.
Um, Adding the fact that I was midwifing myself and that I lost a substantial amount of blood, I wasn't in a mind to bond with my baby very well because I needed to heal myself
Mm-hmm.
and build myself back up. So I was, breastfeeding went fine. Like I did all the steps, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I felt like that in love, absolutely just adoring this little boy until like my 3rd week postpartum.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me really sad. And it's not fun to admit because you're a mom and you hear all these stories of as soon as this baby is here, oh, you just fell in love. And I just didn't have the bandwidth to fall in
Mm-hmm.
love. Like I missed the brand new phase of him because I had to lay there and build up an iron supply and try and breathe. It was
Mhm.
tough. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that is a huge thing. And I also wanted to touch on that because you talk about bleeding, but I haven't heard you say or classify it as a hemorrhage. So, from the sounds of it, it was a postpartum hemorrhage and quite a hefty one.
It was 100% a postpartum hemorrhage, and they ended up weighing it. That stuff that was not immediately in the pool, in
Mm-hmm.
my bathtub. It's like a large jetted tub.
Mm-hmm.
So the stuff they could weigh measured out to be 1,300 cc's,
Wow.
and a hemorrhage, depending on who you ask, typically 500 to 750 cc.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Wow. Yeah.
my
Yeah.
my iron level was 7 something the next day, and I almost went into shock. I was very like talkative to my midwives because I said, "Oh, I'm going to pass out. I need to lay down." I avoided passing out, but they did do my blood pressure, and I could tell it was bad because Kristen did not say it out loud
Mm.
to me. And
Mm-hmm.
so I knew she was hiding it from me, but it was either 60 or 58 over 40 something. It's a very low blood
Yeah.
pressure.
Very, very low. Yeah, that actually reminds me of the numbers, very similar numbers that I heard postpartum for my son, because I had a postpartum hemorrhage with him. And it was the same kind of thing, except the person that took my blood pressure was a student midwife at the time.
Hmm.
And so she did say the numbers out loud. And I was not yet a midwife or student midwife. Well, I was, but I had just started. And so wasn't super aware with the numbers. And I was like, that sounds really low because I'd been at births before. And then when she turned to the midwife and said, "Can you take this blood pressure? Because I think this cuff is broken." I was like, that's low, low, you
Yeah.
know? So, yeah, that is very interesting. And knowing now that amount that was measured outside of the tub, which means you lost more than 1,300 cc's,
Hmm.
is at that point, if you were in the hospital, a blood transfusion would have already been on the table, like as an
Yeah.
option to like probably highly, highly, highly advised. Um, so from the sounds of it, you did not go to the hospital at all to get any kind of transfusion. You kind of just took supplements and did things to boost your iron at home and then stayed in bed for 2 weeks.
And that is not an exaggeration. When we tell moms to stay in bed for 2 weeks and then they think, okay, well, I'm going to go to the living room, I went to bed or to my toilet, which from my bed 15 feet away and
Mm-hmm.
back. And that was it for
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks because I knew that's what I needed to do and do the supplements. And even though my husband is a vegetarian, I am not. And
Mm-hmm.
so he was making steak and giving me all the dark greens and iron heavy everything and lots of vitamin C and avoiding a lot of dairy. And we were just focusing every way we could to get my iron back up so that I could, function. And then after the 2 weeks, I was still like being pushed around in a wheelie chair through the house for like another week. My husband was like, "Nope, the midwife said, so I'm following the rules."
Yeah. Good rule follower, because I was just about to ask the whole standing up with that much blood loss. Like, you were at risk of fainting for a very long time.
For sure.
Yeah. So, did you ever get those? Like, did you ever faint or pass out throughout those 2 weeks?
Not once. Towards the end of the 2 weeks, I did attempt to take a shower
Mm-hmm.
instead of just like a sponge bath. I was disgusting. Oh, I felt so gross.
Mm.
But I always had my husband right there, and I took a shower. I did like a maybe like 5 minutes and did it as fast as I could. And then I was like, honey, I need help. I'm feeling lightheaded already. Let's get me back to bed.
That was my next question. It was literally going to be my next question was like, how were showers for you? Because even, you know, postpartum showers in general, even if you didn't lose that much blood, just like precautionary, they say always have someone in the shower with you for the first couple showers, or
Mm.
not in the shower with you, but somewhere
Right.
nearby that you could speak to. And my thought was, did you take a hot shower?
I took a moderate shower. It wasn't as
Yeah.
cool as it should have been, but it wasn't as hot
Yeah.
as I normally do. I also
Yeah.
have one of those, it's like a stall shower, but it has a seat built in. So I did sit in it to do my shower. This was all I do not recommend doing what I did to other moms, but because I was aware of the support system I have, and because my husband has an amazing job in which he gets 8 weeks of paternity leave that he can use at any point in week intervals through the baby's first year of life. He did the first like month with me. So he took the first 2 weeks off and just all he did was take care of me, fed me, he brought food into the bed, and I ate every single meal and had him with me all of the time. So
Mm-hmm.
it was because I knew I had that strong of a support system, I made the decision for myself to not go in. However, I would strongly suggest if anyone lose that much blood, a blood transfusion would be a good idea.
Yeah. See, I feel like we're so in tune right now because my next thing was going to be what would you suggest for other parents? Because, you have the background and expertise in this field. So you are knowing what to watch for, knowing what to do, knowing what to say when you feel certain things to the right people. And so the fact that you literally had multiple midwives that you could reach out to and be like, hey, I'm feeling this. What would you suggest? Like to bounce those ideas off of them. And even as like a non-licensed person, I would also advise just like obviously, this podcast, like it's for educational purposes. Even though Rebecca is a medical provider, she's not going to go tell you do this, we
Mm-mm.
are just giving advice as to birthing people and people with a little bit of background, me a little bit, you a lot of background in this midwifery field. Is I would highly suggest for anybody that has a hemorrhage, especially to the substantial amount that you did,
Mm-hmm.
to go into the hospital and either get a blood transfusion or an iron infusion.
At least be monitored for a while. Yes.
Right. And to be monitored and to, even get that opinion from the hospital setting, which they would likely advise, yeah, you should be here for a few days at
Mm-hmm.
least, to be monitored and evaluated. Oh, yeah. Because I'm happy to hear that a lot of things went smoothly for you because of your support system. But there was lots of chances where it could not have gone as smoothly.
Absolutely. And that's why it's more of a do as I say, not as I do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I was able to have that conversation with my midwives. We knew what my support team looked like. We knew what my education was on the thing, how to build up my blood supply, how to take care of myself. I knew the steps I needed to follow, and I knew I could not veer from them. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a special case scenario.
Right.
And if I did it again, would I do the same thing? I don't know. I don't know, because I probably would want to go in. I know that that immediate iron or blood transfusion would have made me feel so much better and let me bond with my baby faster, let me feel more like a human being again. There's a lot of things where I wanted this to happen a certain way. None of it happened the way I wanted.
Mhm.
So I wanted to cling to the last bit of what I wanted, which was a full home birth, no transfer, right? And that was one of the hardest things processing wise was I in my start of care documents that my midwives provided me, a lot of midwives have this. How do you feel about the pregnancy? Or what do you want for your birth? Things like that. My midwives have a line that says, describe your dream birth. It can be as much as what you want to eat, what your environment looks like, who is there, all of these things. And when I filled it out, I was like, my labor is going to start at night. It's going to be really peaceful. Um, I'm going to labor as long as I can on my own, call the midwives in. I want my midwives to braid my hair. And the only like male energy in the area was my husband and my little boy, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I just wanted to be surrounded by women who were going to care for me. And if you look at my labor, I was surrounded by men who didn't acknowledge me. It wasn't their job to, right? They are taking their own exams. I was stuck in not a hospital bed, but in a chair. I couldn't get up and walk around when I wanted to. I was surrounded by screens. None of this was what I envisioned. It was the middle of the freaking day. It was not this relaxing, beautiful thing where I had female energy and support to love on me and guide me through this beautiful transition. It was me midwifing myself all alone in a not familiar environment. And that was tough. And so when I share this story, everyone is so impressed. And don't get me wrong, it's pretty impressive that I went through my first labor, did my exam, passed it. That's great, but it wasn't what I wanted.
Right.
Yes, there's a lot that I wish I could go back and change, but I am okay with the fact that I decided to stay home because I wanted to hang on to that last piece of my story, which was I did a home birth and didn't transfer to a hospital setting.
Yeah. And I know that feeling of wanting to have that final piece, because and I know I keep bringing up my son's birth, but in comparison, and I'm not saying let's compare all the time.
It sounds like we have similar parallels at least.
Yeah, there are definitely very similar parallels, but for me, you know, and I'm not saying this to like rub in your face or anything that I had a home birth and all of this stuff. Like I did get to have my home birth and have people around, but I didn't get that final piece of staying at home
Mhm,
because I did end up transferring and I dealt with the opposite of grieving, that kind of sense of a loss of that beautiful ending,
mhm,
like why couldn't it just be like the end? And then you are kind of grieving the why couldn't I just have that beginning,
mhm.
that smooth support in the way that I imagined it to be. And then you did end up having that closure of staying at home, but that decision also came with consequences.
Absolutely.
It's so, and I bring this up because it just shows that regardless of how hard you plan, even as a birth provider yourself who wants everything to be just so, there's no way you can plan everything. And
Yeah.
this is the exact reason why when I talk to clients about a birth plan, quote, air quotes here, plan, I call them birth preferences
Mm.
because you can have your preferences, but your birth preferences never go as expected. But that doesn't mean that it's always going to turn to the negative. It just means they don't go as expected.
I also have changed the way I reference birth plans, and I call them
Hmm.
birth maps. Um,
I like that.
because you're trying to get from one place to another. but often there's a bunch of different ways to get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's an ideal way to get there, but sometimes there's construction and you got to go
Mm-hmm.
around or you got to do this way,
Mm-hmm.
but you can get right back on that road in a different way. So,
Just take a detour.
exactly. So, yeah.
So let's dive a little bit more into your postpartum. Would you categorize yourself in any form of having postpartum depression or anxiety beyond those couple weeks or even in those first few weeks?
To be frank, this is going to sound weird because I do have generalized depression and anxiety. I was prepared mentally to have postpartum depression and anxiety because having it in your day-to-day life gives you an increased risk, right? An increased
Mm-hmm.
chance of having it in postpartum.
Right.
I really don't think I had the energy in the first 2 weeks. I didn't have the energy to have any emotion. I felt like a zombie. So, no, I do not believe I had any postpartum depression or anxiety until I started getting better and able to walk around and stuff. And this goes back to me not being able to empty my bladder either. Um, and I experienced a pretty good bladder prolapse after
Mm.
birth. And we have discussed it. It's not so common with first time moms as it is, repeat moms. But what me and my midwives and everyone I've shared the story with kind of guess at is that it was because I was holding that baby in.
That is exactly what crossed my mind. That is exactly what crossed my mind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I probably could have pushed him out an hour earlier, and I didn't. And even when he was coming out, I was fighting it tooth and nail. And with all that swelling that I experienced, I think what they thought was swelling was really my bladder just hanging there.
Mm.
It's not super obvious right away,
Mm-hmm.
but when I tried to deliver my placenta or when I went up to go to the bathroom, I just kept saying, I can't sit. Like, it feels like my body, my insides are going to fall out of me. It feels like nothing is supporting me and I'm just going to flip inside out. It was so uncomfortable.
Yeah, your pelvic floor was completely fatigued.
Hmm.
So fatigued of doing those pencil legs in the car and when you got home, you know?
Exactly. So, with prolapses, it's not talked about. Pelvic organ prolapse is not really talked about very often at all. And
Mhm.
to think about it, your pelvic floor holds you together. It holds you in,
Mhm.
and to not be able to trust it, it feels like something's falling out of you. That was so hard to come to terms with. I went to pelvic floor therapy. I did all the exercises. It took me maybe 10 months before I felt completely symptom free. I still have a prolapse. It doesn't go away, but it can get better and your pelvic floor can get stronger and hold you in better. But feeling like you can't trust your own body when it just did everything it was supposed to do and this amazing thing, and I'm walking around, it feels like I have a secret that's about to fall out of me at any moment.
Mm. Mhm.
That led to a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression and I always wanted more than one baby. Made me second guess if I ever wanted to do it again because I don't want
Mm.
that feeling. So yeah, no on the like typical sense of postpartum depression, but it was situational and completely related to my prolapse that I had a hard time processing that.
Yeah. Yeah, and in those moments, it's so easy to feel alone because what you said, it's not talked about enough.
Mm-mm.
People don't really, I feel like a lot of people steer away from the conversations of how hard postpartum is on the birthing person's body. Like, it is so insanely hard. And yeah, everybody talks about oh, you'll be sore, your boobs will hurt. You might sometimes have these prolapses, but prolapse is occasionally mentioned, and it's not talked about enough in detail. Like, bladder prolapse, I have not yet heard that one. I have not yet heard about somebody having a bladder prolapse outside of like uterine or cervical prolapse.
Exactly.
Those are the common ones that I hear, but there are other pelvic floor organs.
There are. You can have different kinds of prolapses: a bladder, a cervical or uterine, or your rectal prolapse. Any of those can
Mm-hmm.
prolapse and protrude, and it's like you can just feel it. It feels like if you have a tampon or a menstrual cup in and you feel like, oh, that's not in right, or it's fallen out,
Mm-hmm.
except it's your body and you don't get to just push it back into place.
Right.
It just sits there.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Yeah. That sounds like something that would be extremely hard to fathom and deal with on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any resources for prolapse that you utilized?
My number one resource was my pelvic floor therapist. She specializes in prolapses and making your pelvic floor stronger. Her name is Monica White, and she is in Waterloo or Cedar Falls, Iowa. And I loved her. We did all the exercises, and she got me to a point where I was pretty much asymptomatic. I didn't have any pressure feelings. There are women, though, that maybe don't have an obvious prolapse, but they have a weak pelvic floor.
Mm-hmm.
We always say, the inside joke of like, Mom, you can't sneeze or you'll pee your pants, or you can't laugh too hard. That's not normal, and it doesn't have to be normal. It is normal in the sense that a lot of people experience it. It's not at your most healthiest, and it just means your pelvic floor is weak.
Right.
And I can say that after working on my pelvic floor, I don't have any issues with like leaking when I laugh or sneeze or cough too hard. Nothing like that. And I strongly recommend any woman, your pelvic floor from childhood all the way to elderly, 100 years old, you need to take care of it, and it can get strengthened.
Mm-hmm.
So I recommend physical therapy for anybody who has any kind of symptoms like that. And it's okay to talk about it.
Yeah, it should be talked about because
Mm-hmm.
just like you said, it's kind of hard to explain it when it happens so often to like, that joke of like, Mom, don't cough or
Mm-hmm.
sneeze. But the way that I kind of phrase it, because I've also heard it a couple of times around, is like, yes, it is very, very common that happens, but it is not necessarily normal.
Exactly.
And the definition of normal is hard anyways, right? Because every single individual is different. But yeah, it's very, very common, but that does not have to be your normal.
Right.
There are ways to help with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, if this is okay with you, do you mind sharing how your prolapse impacted your intimacy postpartum?
That's a really good question, because I think it was much more mental for me than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, we did the wait and make sure I was healed. I had a little tear, right? It
Mm-hmm.
was enough for just a quick little figure 8 stitch, no major issues. I didn't like rip, like some
Right.
lady. I didn't get a million stitches. But if I am laying and like can look with a mirror, I can see my bladder sitting at the introitus. I'm using a lot of, technical terms, but like right at the opening, right?
Yeah.
You aren't supposed to see that. um,
Right.
and it's very vulnerable in a way that you never thought you would have to be with your your partner, the person you're supposed to be most vulnerable with, right?
Mhm.
I figured he'd seen it all of me. Well, it turns out he never looked at my bladder before.
Right.
So it's just like it was mm, everything about me looked different physically, and I didn't know how it was going to feel. After doing reading and a deep dive into what prolapses can be like, it could be painful to have intercourse after with a prolapse. I didn't know if it was going to be painful. I didn't know if it would be painful because I just gave birth or if I knew it was going to be painful because of a prolapse. This is a great question because I just recently asked my husband. It took me that long. My baby's 16 months. It took me that long to get like the bravery to ask if I felt different with a prolapse,
Mm.
you know?
Mhm.
And thank goodness, even it was like uncomfortable in the, yeah, we needed more lube than we once did, kind of thing, like a little
Mhm.
bit
But that
dry,
could also be from breastfeeding too, so
breastfeeding, postpartum, whatever standard stuff. Um,
mhm.
but it didn't hurt. I didn't have any pain, which was nice, even from the beginning. And I never had any problems, but I could feel it. It didn't, for me, feel the same. You can very much tell I am not as tight as I was before. And it
Yeah.
seemed like a lot different tissue involved, a lot of different things. It's hard to describe. But yeah, it took me until just recently to ask my husband, does it feel different for you? Does it feel worse than it did? What is it like? We have a very good, strong relationship, and he was able to, tell me honestly. But he said it did feel different at the beginning when it was at its worst, before I had really done all my exercises and gotten my pelvic floor stronger. But now it doesn't feel any different or odd or anything like that. And that was a relief for me. But I feel kind of bad that it took me that long to even muster up the courage to ask, because I didn't think I didn't want to know the answer.
Yeah, yeah. I would say don't feel bad because, there's a lot of, as you know, being the one that has dealt with that personally, but I feel like a lot of people, even when they don't have a prolapse or experience anything like that, they're very concerned about how their vagina is going to feel postpartum. There has always been that also kind of running joke of like, oh, you're going to be looser after you have a baby. And so a lot of birthing people are worried about whether or not they're still going to be desired or
Mhm.
wanted or enjoy intimacy anymore. And it's important to have that conversation with your partner. And I'm happy that even though it's been 16 months, that you had that conversation.
Yeah,
Some people don't. Some people don't feel comfortable. Some people would rather it be hush hush and have it be something that is never talked about. But I guess I'm saying that to say, if it's concerning to you, talk about it
right,
and just be prepared for the answer because don't ask anything you don't want the answer to,
right.
you know?
It shouldn't be shameful or feel like it's your fault if the answer is, yeah, it feels different, because different doesn't mean bad. And
Right.
the thing is, you can look at it in the way of, well, now we get to re-explore, and maybe things might feel better in a different way now, or like we get to try new things and see what feels good now with this situation,
Right.
you know?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I was very scared, and that it it all happens in your brain, right? As a woman,
Hmm.
you just think about everything, and that's where the anxiety and the depression of I wish that I was just back to how I was before. And
Right.
thank goodness I never really felt like I resented my baby for it, because I very easily could have. Like, if your big freaking head hadn't rearranged my pelvic organs, like
Hmm.
my whole life would
Yeah.
be. And I didn't have a little first baby. My baby was 8 pounds, 4 ounces.
That's a juicy one.
At 39 weeks, like, I'm glad I didn't go much further. So,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's important to be able to talk to, and just to keep in mind, hopefully your partner is that person that you feel most comfortable having those vulnerable discussions with.
Right. Yeah. I agree 100%. One thing I just thought about that is kind of a little bit off topic, but I don't know if this is something that you have heard or told clients before, because you you scheduled your NARM at 39 weeks, and then 2 days later was the test.
Mhm.
And that is kind of funny to me in the fact that you just happened to start labor the day that your test was supposed to happen. Because, you could have had him closer to his expected due date. But the reason why I'm bringing this back up is because I used to hear from one of the midwives that was my preceptor when the clients would get a little bit down, like, oh, this baby just won't come out. She's like, you know what you should do? Schedule a really big event or schedule a
Are you
super,
kidding?
super awesome date. And then that is when
Yeah.
you're going to have a baby. Yeah.
I I have joked about it ever since. I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, just, you know, schedule a life-altering event, an exam that you've studied the past 5 years for." Like, I don't
Right.
know, make it a very
Yeah.
important thing. But no, I never said
Hmm.
that before. And I
Yeah.
also really leaned on all of those first-time mom stereotypes. So I was like, "My
Mm.
baby's not gonna be born until May." I thought I was at least gonna go a week over. So
Hmm.
I didn't even consider that he was gonna be born mid-April.
Right. Before his due date of all
Yeah.
things.
And I
Hmm.
joked with the person when they called to schedule my test. I said, "Well, I am 39 weeks, but what's the probability that I'm not gonna be in labor or anything, but if I am, what's the cancellation policy?"
Right.
And the man on the phone was like, "Oh, that's, with the people that give you the test, not us, not the proctoring site. So you don't owe us anything, but um, if you don't show up, we'll make a note that you're probably having a baby." I
Right.
was like, "Okay." So when I waddled in and said, "Well, I'm here to eat my words."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. I think that that's just kind of crazy that I just thought of that. And she always used to say that all the time. And then here you are having a baby on it became one of the most important days of your life for multiple reasons.
It
So,
sure did. And I was like, "Come on, Sean. Can't you just let today be about me? You had to steal my spotlight."
hey, he was just giving you that, the what to expect for the rest of your life.
Right. Oh, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's kind of wrap up with a few questions here. If you were to give birthing people or expectant families any advice on what to do throughout their pregnancies to prepare for labor and birth, what would that advice be?
My biggest thing uh, to prepare physically is make sure that your iron is as the best you can get it, because you need that
Hmm.
extra. You don't know how much you're going
Hmm.
to lose. And the better your iron stores, the better you're going to feel after birth. Also, plan just plan to go to pelvic floor therapy, whether you have a prolapse or not. Everybody's pelvic floor is weaker after baby,
Hmm. That's a good point.
and I think it should be standard of care to just rebuild yourself afterwards, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice.
Yeah. So although that's not something you physically need to do prenatally, set that money aside. Put it on your baby registry. People suggest putting cash amount, a donation towards a doula, but donation towards pelvic floor therapy, because, the country we live in, we don't have universal health care.
Right.
it's not as easy or feasible for people to always go, and you might need a referral. Plan that stuff ahead of time so that you don't have to worry about it when you're exhausted and have a newborn.
Yeah. And then if you talk about it with your provider ahead of time, they might also just be prepared to write you a referral postpartum.
Exactly. Yep. Those are my big ones.
Those are great. Iron stores and pelvic floor therapy.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. What is one resource that I can share with the listeners on your behalf? And it could be for your local area or just general.
Yeah. I wanted to share this resource because when I first heard about it, I thought, that seems a little frivolous and not necessary. But it actually completely changed the way I processed my birth story and how I felt about it. It gave me a lot of clarity. And the resource is Birth Story Medicine. And there's a website, it's just birthstorymedicine.com. And you can find somebody to listen. You just go down to like the top session and do birth story sessions for parents. But you can find someone that will listen to your birth story, but also they will actively pose questions and guide you through telling your birth story, not to give you
Mm.
a way to change it, but for you to think about things in ways that you hadn't before. And I didn't consider a lot of things about my birth story until I did this with one of the birth story listeners. So I found it just amazing and enlightening to be able to share it and have someone guide me through my story.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. That's actually such a phenomenal resource because that's very similar to why I'm kind of doing the podcast. I'm not necessarily like guiding people through in a different way, but to give a platform for people to actually share their story and be heard,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was a birth that happened a month ago, 2 weeks ago, or a birth that happened years ago. It is still very much a healing process to talk about it and voice it and put it out there. And for others to know, like this platform specifically allows others that are listening to know that they're not alone in what they went through. But this resource of birth story medicine, it sounds very individualized to help that individual process their story. And I really like that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
No, I highly recommend it. Like I said, when I first heard of it, I had a friend who was becoming a birth story listener.
Mm.
And so she was offering free, mini sessions or half sessions to practice her skills. And I was like, I would be a good example. I didn't have that like traumatic birth. Mine's kind of light and fun and exciting, what I thought when I was going into it to share.
Mm-hmm.
And I shared it and was like, oh my goodness, there was a lot that I had felt about my birth that I didn't feel heard about
Mm.
because it's such a whirlwind of a story that people are amazed, excited, not believing, about my story,
Mm-hmm.
but they aren't, wow, that sounds hard or that sounds lonely or something like that. And so after I got out of it, I told her, I was like, I'm not going to lie. I did not expect to get anything from this. I thought I was helping you. And this just rocked my world, being able to do this. So, highly recommend that.
Love it. Love it. Well, speaking on your birth specifically, I would love for you to give me one word that would describe your experience of pregnancy, labor, and birth for you.
That's a tough one. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a few ways I could go,
Yeah.
but I think I like the word grounding because it means a lot to me, but I don't think anybody else would have described it as that.
Mm.
But to me, it taught me how I'm not in control, how me and my baby are one team. We are also two separate people, and I'm not in control all the time. So I felt really grounded about the fact that it didn't go the way I wanted, and yet it happened the way it needed to.
I think that's a great word and a great description for it, especially with your explanation afterwards of the reason as to why you chose that word, grounding.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. I'm so excited to be able to hear your story and to just listen to it, because your story is not a common one. And it's important for your story to be heard. And it's important for others to listen and hear it, because birth is so different for every person. And like you just said, your birth wasn't necessarily traumatic. It just didn't go as planned, but there was still a lot that you had to work through mentally with it, of processing your birth experience. So.
Exactly. Everybody's birth is amazing and different and brings a new life into the world that's going to be as amazing and different as their birth was, right?
Mm-hmm. Very much. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course.
This was fun.
It was. I had a good time too. I had such a great time interviewing Rebecca for this episode. It was good to connect with an old classmate, and it was also really good to hear her story. I think that it's important to share and know that as a birth provider, it can be really hard to give birth because you're so much in your head when you're dealing with things. With that said, Rebecca's situation is so individualized and so unique that I think it's even more important to focus on the fact that she made some really tough decisions throughout her story. So, Rebecca, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your story, and I am so proud of you for being such an amazing midwife and rocking it as a mom. Next week, we'll be hearing from a guest named Rukaya. Rukaya goes into some detail on what she remembers from her births, and she talks about how watching her older sister give birth when she was only 16 years old and how that impacted how she wanted to birth her children. She also talks a little bit about parenting. There is a small mention of domestic violence and how that impacted her outlook on what birth means to her. So tune in next week to hear the details on that one. And just one last gentle reminder to please consider joining the Baki community on Patreon for just $3 a month. It'll really help support the production of the podcast. I would also really love for you to share a review on Apple Podcasts so that others can see it and it boosts us up to the top for people to see and hear. All right, thanks so much for tuning in. I will talk to you next week. Bye for now.